November 18, 1943, 15,000 feet above Germany. The mechanic from Cleveland felt his P-38J Lightning shudder as another burst of cannon fire walked past his left wing, too close. The Messerschmitt 109 behind him was good, better than most. Had been on his tail for 3 minutes now, which in aerial combat might as well be 3 hours. The German pilot was laughing, probably. They all did when they first saw the twin-boomed Lightning. Called it the fork-tailed devil when they were being polite. Called it target practice when they thought they had one cornered. The temperature at altitude was 40 below zero, but sweat ran down his spine. His hands moved without thinking. Throttle, stick, rudder, muscle memory from 500 hours of training, and 23 combat missions. The 109 was faster in a dive, more agile in a turn. Every German pilot knew it. Every American pilot knew it too. But the mechanic from Cleveland knew something else. Something the German behind him was about to learn. He pulled the Lightning into a climbing turn, letting the German follow. The Messerschmitt's nose lit up with cannon fire again. 20-millimeter shells sparked off his right boom. One more second and those shells would find his cockpit. That's when he chopped the throttle on his left engine while firewalling the right. The P-38 spun like a barn door blown off its hinges, a maneuver impossible in any single-engine fighter. The German overshot, suddenly finding himself in front instead of behind. The Lightning's nose held 4 50-caliber machine guns and one 20-millimeter cannon. When they fired together, they created what pilots called the triangle of death, a convergence point where nothing survived. The mechanic from Cleveland pressed the trigger. The German pilot had exactly 1 second to realize his mistake. Not enough time to laugh anymore. The Messerschmitt came apart in pieces. First the tail, then the wings, then everything else. No parachute. There usually wasn't when the triangle found you. The mechanic from Cleveland didn't celebrate. 3 more 109s were climbing toward him, and he was 60 miles from friendly territory with 15 minutes of fuel. The math was simple. The outcome wasn't. 6 months earlier, the P-38J had been a joke to the Luftwaffe. The earlier models couldn't dive without compressing, couldn't turn without stalling, couldn't climb without overheating. German pilots would actually toy with them the way a cat plays with something it's about to kill. They'd force the Lightning into a dive, watch it lock up in compression helpless, then finish it off at their leisure. Word spread through the Luftwaffe squadrons. The twin-boomed American fighter was easy meat, good for beginners to practice on. The engineer from Lockheed who'd designed the fixes didn't live to see them work. Heart attack at his desk 3 weeks before the first J models reached England. But his solutions saved hundreds of pilots. Dive brakes to prevent compression, hydraulic ailerons for high-speed control, better intercoolers to prevent engine failure. Small changes that meant the difference between dying over Germany and making it home to write letters to girls in places like Ohio and Tennessee. The teacher from Arkansas had been flying P-38s since the first models reached the Pacific. He'd learned their weaknesses the hard way, watching friends die because their fighters betrayed them at the worst moments. Watched a kid from Montana compress at 20,000 feet, unable to pull out of a dive while 3 Zeros followed him down, taking their time. The kid had screamed all the way to the ocean. 60 seconds of radio transmission nobody who heard it would forget. But the J model was different. The teacher from Arkansas discovered this over a ball when 6 Zeros jumped his flight. The old Lightning would have been death. The new one was a killer. He shot down 3 Japanese fighters in 4 minutes, using the P-38's unique ability to fly on one engine to create angles of attack that shouldn't exist. Roll with the left engine, climb with the right. Suddenly you're above and behind an enemy who thought physics wouldn't allow it. The triangle of death wasn't just about firepower. It was about concentration. Most fighters spread their guns across the wings. At 300 yards, their fire pattern was 30 feet wide. Spray and pray, hoping some bullets found something vital. The Lightning put everything in the nose. At 300 yards, the pattern was 3 feet wide. At 200 yards, 18 inches. Every bullet, every shell hitting the same spot, like driving nails with a sledgehammer. The farm boy from Nebraska learned to use this precision over France. His squadron was escorting B-17s when 30 Focke-Wulf 190s appeared from nowhere. The German fighters were after the bombers, ignoring the escort. Big mistake. The farm boy from Nebraska lined up behind a 190 and fired a half-second burst, just half a second. 40 pounds of metal traveling 3,000 feet per second, all hitting a space the size of a dinner plate. The German fighter didn't explode, it disintegrated. One moment it existed, the next it was confetti. The other German pilots noticed. They always noticed when death was that sudden, that complete. The attack on the bombers faltered. Some of the 190s turned to engage the Lightnings. That's when they learned the P-38J's other secret. It could turn inside them. Not much, but enough. At 20,000 feet, where the air was thin and single engines struggled for power, the Lightning's twin engines gave it an advantage nobody expected. The salesman from Chicago was probably the first to perfect the rolling scissors with a P-38J. 2 Messerschmitt 110s had him boxed, one high, one low. The standard response was to dive and run. Instead, he killed one engine, rolled inverted, fired the dead engine back up while killing the other. The Lightning corkscrewed through space in ways that violated every rule the German pilots knew. Both 110s overshot. Both died in the same burst from the triangle. The whole thing took 12 seconds. Word spread through the Luftwaffe differently now. The twin-boom devil had teeth. Worse, it had learned to use them. German pilots who'd been transferred from the Eastern Front, where they'd racked up dozens of kills against Soviet fighters, found themselves outmaneuvered by Americans they'd dismissed as amateurs. The P-38J could fight at 30,000 feet, where the 109's engine gasped for air. It could fly 500 miles, fight for 20 minutes, and fly 500 miles home. No German fighter could match that range. The carpenter from Oregon discovered another advantage by accident. His right engine was shot up over Belgium, running rough, maybe 5 minutes from failure. A 109 saw him limping along and moved in for an easy kill. The carpenter from Oregon let him come. At the last second, he feathered the dying engine's prop and threw the Lightning into a flat spin using just the left engine. The 109 pilot, expecting a straight-line victim, overshot by 200 yards. The carpenter restarted his damaged engine. It gave him 10 seconds of power before seizing completely, enough to line up the triangle. The German pilot never knew what hit him. Probably thought the Lightning's spin was a death spiral right up until the moment his own cockpit exploded. The twins from Minnesota flew P-38Js in the same squadron. Everyone said it was bad luck. Brothers in the same unit. They didn't care. They developed their own tactics, using the Lightning's twin engines like no one else. One would fly with engines desynchronized, creating a distinctive beat that drew attention. The other would fly with engines synchronized, nearly silent from certain angles, invisible until too late. Over Stuttgart, they killed 4 109s in 2 minutes using this technique. The Germans never figured out there were 2 of them. The older twin took a 30mm shell through his cockpit over Munich 2 weeks later. The younger twin flew his brother's body home, 500 miles with a corpse in formation beside him, landed at the same moment, like they'd practiced 1,000 times. The ground crew said later that the surviving twin never flew the same after that. More careful, they said, like he was flying for 2. The P-38J's real advantage wasn't speed or firepower or even those twin engines. It was reliability. The mechanic from Detroit figured this out while watching other squadrons lose pilots to mechanical failures. The Lightning had 2 of everything. 2 engines, 2 superchargers, 2 electrical systems. Lose one, you still had one. He'd limped home 6 times on single engines. Twice with hydraulics shot out, once with half his tail missing. The Lightning would fly when it had no right to fly. This mattered over Germany, where a mechanical failure meant death or prison. The insurance salesman from Philadelphia was jumped by three 190s over Schweinfurt. They shot out his left engine, riddled his booms with cannon shells, destroyed his radio. Any other fighter would have gone down. The Lightning flew 200 miles on one engine, the insurance salesman nursing at home while German fighters gave up the chase, probably assuming he'd crash on his own. He landed at an emergency field in Belgium with 3 gallons of fuel remaining. German pilots started calling the P-38J der Gabelschwanz Teufel, with genuine respect now, the fork-tailed devil that wouldn't die. They developed specific tactics for fighting it. Never dive with one. It would follow you down, and its guns would find you in the recovery. Never try to outclimb one. Those twin engines gave it power at altitudes where single-engine fighters gasped. Never assume a damaged Lightning was finished. It could fly on one engine better than some fighters flew on one. The banker from New York loved the way German pilots reacted when they saw P-38Js now. 6 months ago, they'd come straight in, confident, aggressive. Now they circled, waited, looked for advantages that might not exist. The fear was visible in their tactics. They'd stopped laughing, started dying. December 20th, 1943. The big test came over Bremen. The 8th Air Force sent 400 bombers against the submarine pens. The Luftwaffe responded with everything that could fly. The accountant from Baltimore counted 60 German fighters rising to meet them. His squadron had 8 P-38Js. The odds were typical. The first pass was chaos. Fighters everywhere, tracers filling the sky like deadly rain. The accountant from Baltimore shot down a 109, watched his wingman kill a 190, then found himself alone with 2 Messerschmitt 110s trying to box him in. The old tactic, one high, one low, catch the American in a pincer. They hadn't learned yet that the P-38J didn't fly by the old rules. He pulled the Lightning into a climbing spiral that shouldn't have been possible at 25,000 feet. The thin air should have stalled him out, would have in any other fighter. But those twin Allisons kept pulling, kept the nose up, while the German fighters wallowed, trying to follow. At the top of the climb, he hammer-headed down, the triangle of death finding the first 110 as it struggled to recover. The plane's tail section separated cleanly, like it had been cut with a torch. The second 110 dove away, wanting no part of whatever witchcraft the American was performing. The mechanic from Cleveland was in trouble now. A 109 had damaged his right engine, and oil was streaming from the cowling. The engine would seize in minutes. 3 more German fighters saw him trailing smoke and moved in. They knew a wounded Lightning was still dangerous, approached carefully, not carefully enough. He shut down the dying engine before it could catch fire, feathered the prop to reduce drag. The Lightning could make 300 miles per hour on one engine if you knew how to fly it. The mechanic from Cleveland knew. He turned into the attacking fighters using just rudder and differential flaps, a move that looked like a controlled crash to the Germans. They overshot, expecting him to stall. Instead, he firewalled the good engine and pulled the nose up. The triangle found one 109 immediately. The others scattered. The teacher from Arkansas had his own problems. A Focke-Wulf 190 pilot, one of the good ones, had latched onto his tail and wouldn't shake loose. Every maneuver the teacher tried, the German matched. They'd been dancing for 2 minutes, an eternity in combat. The German was waiting for the American to make a mistake. Everyone made mistakes eventually. That's when the teacher from Arkansas remembered something his instructor had said back in California. The P-38 doesn't fly like other planes. Stop trying to make it. He pulled both engines to idle, dumped his flaps, and basically stopped in midair. The 190 shot passed like the Lightning had hit an invisible wall. Before the German pilot could process what had happened, the teacher had retracted flaps, firewalled both engines, and put a 2-second burst into the 190's cockpit. The German fighter flew straight and level for another 10 seconds before slowly rolling inverted and beginning its final dive. The Triangle of Death was earning its name today. The farm boy from Nebraska had shot down two 109s and damaged a third. The precision of the nose-mounted guns meant that even glancing hits were devastating. Wing roots sheared off, tail sections disintegrated, cockpits vanished in sprays of metal and glass. The German pilots were learning that you didn't survive the triangle. You avoided it or you died. By the time the bombers reached Bremen, the German fighters were pulling back. Not retreating exactly, but no longer pressing attacks with the same aggression. They'd lost 12 fighters to the P-38Js while shooting down only one Lightning, and that pilot had bailed out successfully, would be back in action within a week. The bomber crews noticed the difference. Usually, German fighters would follow them all the way to the target, harassing, picking off stragglers. Today they kept their distance, wary of the twin-boomed Guardians. The carpenter from Oregon had mechanical problems now. His left supercharger was failing, probably from a piece of shrapnel he hadn't even felt hit. The Lightning was losing power, falling behind the formation. In the old days, this would have meant certain death. A lone, damaged fighter over Germany was meat for the Luftwaffe. But the P-38J could still fight on one good engine. When two 109s approached, thinking they had an easy kill, the carpenter from Oregon proved it. He let them come close, closer than they should have. They were overconfident, seeing the streaming vapor from his bad engine. At 200 yards, they opened fire. At 100 yards, the carpenter snap-rolled the Lightning and pulled into a dive that the damaged supercharger shouldn't have allowed. Gravity helped where the engine couldn't. The 109s followed, and that was their mistake. Even damaged, even dying, the P-38J could perform its signature trick, differential engine power, creating impossible angles. The carpenter killed one engine completely, let the other scream at full power. The Lightning pirouetted in space. The triangle found the first 109 at 50 yards. The second German fighter flew through the debris cloud of his wingman and never recovered, spinning down out of control. The twins from Minnesota had been separated in the fight. The surviving twin found himself alone, hunting. That's what it had become, hunting. The German fighters were no longer the predators. Over the submarine pens, he spotted a formation of 6 Focke-Wulf 190s setting up for a run on the B-17s. They hadn't seen him yet, approaching from their 6 o'clock high. The sun was behind him. Perfect. He could have called for help. Should have. 6-1 were bad odds, even in a P-38J, but his brother would have taken those odds, would have laughed at them. So the surviving twin pushed the control yoke forward and dove. The Lightning could reach 400 miles per hour in a dive now, thanks to those dive brakes that kept it from compressing. He hit the German formation at 350 miles per hour, the triangle of death sweeping across them like a scythe. The first 190 exploded, the second lost a wing. The third took 40-50 caliber rounds through the engine and began burning. The other 3 scattered, shocked by the violence of the attack. The twin from Minnesota used his speed to zoom climb back to altitude, trading velocity for height. 2 of the surviving 190s tried to follow. Their engines couldn't match the twin Allisons at altitude. The Lightning rolled over the top of its climb, came down on the German fighters like a hammer. The triangle spoke again. One 190 disintegrated, the other dove away, trailing smoke. The last 190 was smarter, more experienced. He'd maintained his altitude, waited for the American to lose energy. Now he had position, coming in from above and behind. The twin from Minnesota saw him coming, knew he was in trouble. The German had angles and altitude, but the P-38J had something else, the ability to fly in ways that physics said it shouldn't. The twin shut down his left engine at exactly the right moment, applied full right rudder, and basically threw the Lightning sideways through the air. The 190 pilot, expecting conventional evasion, fired where the Lightning should have been. Instead, the American fighter was 90 degrees off that position, nose coming around. The triangle of death found its mark one more time. The one on 90 came apart in sections, the pilot's canopy tumbling away separately. No parachute appeared. 5 victories in 90 seconds. His brother would have been proud, would have laughed and said it was showing off. The surviving twin felt nothing, just empty. He'd keep killing German fighters until they killed him or the war ended. It was all he had left. The bomber crews were reporting something interesting back to intelligence. German fighters were breaking off attacks when P-38s appeared. Not always, not all of them, but enough to notice. The psychological effect of the Lightning was growing. Part of it was the distinctive silhouette. Twin booms meant twin engines meant it could follow you places other fighters couldn't. Part of it was the triangle of death, that concentrated firepower that turned aircraft into aluminum confetti. But mostly it was the reputation. P-38J pilots were hunters. They didn't just defend, they attacked. January 15, 1944. The mission was Berlin. First time the 8th Air Force had tried to reach the German capital, everyone knew the Luftwaffe would throw everything at them. The insurance salesman from Philadelphia checked his ammunition twice. 420 rounds per gun for the 50s, 150 rounds for the 20-millimeter cannon. Enough for maybe 90 seconds of sustained combat. In fighter combat, 90 seconds was a lifetime, several lifetimes. They crossed into German airspace at 28,000 feet. The temperature was 55 below zero. Ice formed on everything, had to be constantly cleared from the windscreen. The insurance salesman from Philadelphia's feet were numb despite the heated suit. His hands moved on muscle memory alone. At this altitude, the P-38J was in its element while single-engine fighters struggled. The twin supercharged Allisons pulled strong and steady. The first German fighters appeared near Hanover. Messerschmitt 109s, the latest G model with the improved engine. They came in from 12 o'clock high, the classic head-on attack. The closing speed was over 600 miles per hour. The insurance salesman from Philadelphia had maybe 3 seconds to fire. He made them count. The triangle of death reached out, found the lead 109 at 400 yards. The German fighter's propeller separated from the engine, flew off like a thrown disc. The rest of the plane followed its own trajectory, tumbling past the American formation. More Germans appeared, dozens of them, the sky filled with aircraft, B-17s, lumbering along at 180 miles per hour, German fighters slashing through at 300, American escorts weaving between them, trying to be everywhere at once. The insurance salesman from Philadelphia shot down a Focke-Wulf 190 that was lining up on a damaged B-17. Saved the bomber, but used 60 rounds of ammunition doing it. Math was becoming important. Too many Germans, not enough bullets. The accountant from Baltimore was doing his own calculations. Fuel consumption at this altitude, distance to Berlin and back, combat reserves. The numbers said they'd make it, barely, if nothing went wrong. Something always went wrong. His wingman's right engine was already running rough, probably carburetor ice. The P-38J's intercoolers were better than earlier models, but not perfect. In this cold, ice could form anywhere. A Messerschmitt 110 made the mistake of trying to engage the accountant head-on. The German twin-engine fighter had good firepower, but couldn't maneuver. The accountant from Baltimore rolled inverted, pulled through a split S that the 110 couldn't follow. Came up behind the German fighter and fired a 1-second burst. The triangle of death found the 110's left engine, then walked across to the right. Both engines exploded simultaneously. The German fighter became a fireball falling toward the earth from 5 miles up. The teacher from Arkansas was engaged in a turning fight with 2 109s. They were trying to bracket him, force him into a defensive spiral where he'd lose energy and become vulnerable. It was a good tactic against most fighters. The P-38J wasn't most fighters. The teacher used differential throttle to create a flat turn that looked wrong to the German pilots. While they tried to figure out how the Lightning was moving sideways through the air, he reversed the differential and snapped around in the opposite direction. The triangle caught 109 across the fuselage just behind the cockpit. The plane broke in half. The second 109 dove away, wanting nothing to do with whatever dark magic the American was performing. Near Berlin, the real test began. The Luftwaffe had concentrated its best pilots here, defending the capital. These weren't the novices sent up to fill quotas. These were expert 10, aces with dozens of victories. They knew every trick, had seen everything, or thought they had. The mechanic from Cleveland found himself in a fight with one of these expert 10. The German was flying a 109 G6 with gondola cannons under the wings. Extra firepower meant extra weight, but this pilot knew how to use it. He forced the mechanic from Cleveland into a series of vertical maneuvers, each one bleeding energy. Classic energy fighting, the German would have him in another 2 turns. That's when the mechanic from Cleveland remembered what made the P-38J special. Not just the twin engines or the concentrated firepower. It was the ability to fly it like 2 different airplanes at once. He pulled both throttles to idle, dumped full flaps, and basically hung the Lightning in the air like a clothesline. The 109 pilot, committed to his energy fight, overshot by 300 yards. Before he could recover, the mechanic had retracted flaps, firewalled both engines, and closed to firing range. The triangle of death spoke for 1 second. The 109's tail separated cleanly. The rest of the plane tumbled forward, the pilot still in his seat, probably wondering how he'd been beaten. Over Berlin itself, the flak was incredible. Black puffs filled the sky at every altitude. The Germans had concentrated hundreds of guns around their capital. The bombers had to fly straight and level for their bomb runs, making them perfect targets. The P-38s tried to suppress the flak positions, diving on gun emplacements, but there were too many. The farm boy from Nebraska saw a B-17 take a direct hit and explode. No parachutes. Another B-17, its tail shot off, began a flat spin toward the city below. He counted 4 parachutes, maybe 5. Not enough. Never enough. A 109 curved in to strafe the parachuting bomber crew. The farm boy from Nebraska dove after him, caught him at 15,000 feet. The triangle of death saved those American lives but used the last of his cannon ammunition. The trip home was a running battle. German fighters followed them all the way to the Dutch border, picking at stragglers. The carpenter from Oregon, still nursing his damaged supercharger, found himself defending a B-17 that had lost 2 engines. The bomber could barely maintain altitude. Every German fighter that saw it moved in for the kill. The carpenter shot down 2 109s and damaged a third before his ammunition ran out. After that, he could only make dummy passes, hoping the Germans would break off when they saw a P-38 approaching. Sometimes it worked. The Lightning's reputation was worth something even with empty guns. He shepherded that bomber for 200 miles, all the way to the Channel. The crew invited him to their base for drinks after. He never made it. Killed 2 weeks later over Hamburg. February 1944 became known as Big Week. The 8th Air Force went after German aircraft production, and the Luftwaffe came up to defend it. The battles were enormous, sometimes involving 1,000 aircraft. The P-38J squadrons were in the thick of it, proving day after day that the twin-boomed Lightning was no longer a joke. The banker from New York had developed his own technique for dealing with German fighters. He'd approach them from below, using the P-38's superior high-altitude performance to maintain energy. The Germans, used to fighting in the horizontal plane, didn't expect attacks from directly beneath. The concentrated nose armament of the Lightning meant he could fire straight up into their bellies, where the armor was thinnest. 3 seconds of the triangle of death from below, and the German fighter would simply come apart. He used this technique to shoot down 4 fighters in 1 day over Leipzig. The last one, a Focke-Wulf 190, never even knew he was there. The banker from New York came up from directly below, waited until he could see oil stains on the German's belly, then fired. The 190 disintegrated so completely that he flew through the debris cloud, pieces of the German fighter rattling off his windscreen like hail. The twins from Minnesota, now just the one twin, had become something else entirely. Something the other pilots watched with a mixture of awe and concern. He'd stopped talking much, stopped joining the poker games, stopped everything except flying and killing. His crew chief said he'd spend hours at his plane, checking ammunition, adjusting gun convergence, making sure the triangle of death was perfect. Over Augsburg, he proved why that obsession mattered. 6 P-38Js against 20 German fighters. The odds said they should run. The surviving twin from Minnesota attacked instead. He shot down 3 109s in the first pass, using short, precise bursts that found cockpits and engines with surgical accuracy. The German formation scattered, shocked by the violence. He followed them down, hunting, found another 109 trying to reform with his squadron. The triangle of death took the Germans' entire tail section off. The plane flew on for several seconds before beginning an uncontrolled tumble. By the time he climbed back to altitude, the other P-38s had driven off the remaining Germans. 5 victories in 4 minutes. The other pilots tried to congratulate him. He just climbed into the truck for the ride back to quarters. His crew chief found him later, sitting in his room, writing a letter to his dead brother's widow. Same letter he wrote every night. Never mailed any of them. The insurance salesman from Philadelphia had started to notice something. German tactics were evolving specifically to counter the P-38J. They'd stopped trying to turn with it. The Lightning's ability to use differential thrust made conventional turning fights suicidal. They'd stopped trying to run from it. Those twin engines gave it speed and endurance they couldn't match. Now they were using slash and run attacks, single high-speed passes where they'd fire and dive away before the Lightning pilots could bring the triangle of death to bear. It was smart. It was also an admission of defeat. The German pilots were no longer trying to win. They were trying to survive. The hunter had become the hunted. March 4th, 1944. The target was Berlin again. The weather was terrible. Clouds from 5,000 to 20,000 feet. The bombers would have to bomb by radar. The escorts would have to fight by instinct. The accountant from Baltimore checked his instruments twice. In these clouds, vertigo could kill you as quickly as German fighters. They broke through the overcast at 21,000 feet into brilliant sunshine and 50 Messerschmitt 109s. The Germans had been waiting above the clouds, knew exactly when and where the Americans would appear. The first 30 seconds were chaos. The accountant from Baltimore saw 2 P-38s go down immediately, caught in the initial ambush. Then the Lightnings recovered, began to fight back. The triangle of death was earning its name in the bright sunshine above the clouds. The accountant shot down a 109 that was attacking a damaged B-17, saved his wingman by destroying a Focke-Wulf 190 that had achieved firing position, lost count of how many Germans were up here. All that mattered was the next target, the next burst, the next second of survival. The teacher from Arkansas found himself alone, separated from his flight in the chaos. 3 109s had him boxed, 1 high, 2 low. They were coordinating their attacks, talking to each other, working as a team. Good pilots, experienced. They knew how to trap a Lightning, but the teacher from Arkansas had learned things in 57 combat missions. He'd learned that the P-38J could do things that shouldn't be possible if you were willing to risk everything. He pointed the Lightning's nose straight up and firewalled both engines. The fighters climbed vertically, something no single-engine fighter could sustain. The 109s tried to follow, stalled out at 23,000 feet. The teacher held the climb for another 1,000 feet, then hammer-headed over and dove. The triangle of death found the first 109 as it wallowed in a stall. The plane came apart like it had been hit by a giant shotgun. The second 109 managed to recover, tried to dive away. The Lightning followed him down, those dive brakes keeping it stable and controlled where earlier models would have compressed. At 350 miles per hour, the teacher fired a 2-second burst. The 109's wing folded back like paper. The plane entered a violent spin, that probably killed the pilot before impact. The third 109 had used the time to set up another attack. The teacher from Arkansas was low on ammunition now, maybe 20 seconds of fire remaining. He had to make it count. The German came in from 4 o'clock high, a perfect deflection shot. The teacher waited, let him get close, closer than was safe. At 100 yards, he snapped the Lightning into a skidding turn using full rudder and opposite aileron. It was an unnatural maneuver that bled energy and made the plane shudder. It also put the triangle of death exactly where the 109 would be in 1 second. The German fighter flew into the stream of bullets and shells like it had been aimed there. The concentrated fire found the ammunition storage. The 109 exploded so violently that pieces of it damaged the Lightning's tail booms. The teacher from Arkansas nursed his damaged fighter back to England on one engine, the other shut down from debris damage. Landed with less than 5 gallons of fuel remaining. The surviving twin from Minnesota had become death incarnate over Germany. Other pilots watched him hunt and felt something cold in their stomachs. He didn't fight anymore. He executed. Over Stuttgart, he shot down 5 German fighters in a single mission. Each kill was precise, economical, no wasted ammunition, no unnecessary maneuvering, just the careful application of the triangle of death to achieve maximum destruction. The 5th kill that day was a Messerschmitt 110 night fighter that had been pressed into day service. The twin-engine German fighter was hopelessly outclassed by the P-38J. The surviving twin from Minnesota could have shot it down from any angle, at any time. Instead, he maneuvered carefully to attack from exactly 6 o'clock level, put his burst directly into the radar operator's position, then walked it forward to the pilot. Both crew members were certainly dead before the plane began its final dive. Other pilots who saw it said later that it wasn't combat, it was murder, necessary murder, but murder nonetheless. The mechanic from Cleveland had his own philosophy about killing. You did it because it was the job. You tried not to think about the men in those German fighters. They had families, girlfriends, lives that mattered to someone, but thinking about that would get you killed. So you focused on the machine, not the man. When the triangle of death tore a 109 apart, you told yourself you'd destroyed equipment, not executed a 22-year-old who'd joined the Luftwaffe because he'd loved flying since childhood. Over Munster, that philosophy was tested. The mechanic shot down a 109 and saw the pilot bail out. The German's parachute didn't open. Equipment failure or damage from the combat, impossible to know. The mechanic from Cleveland watched him fall for 20,000 feet, had time to think about it. Too much time. The German pilot was trying to deploy his reserve chute, pulling at something that wouldn't work. Still pulling as he disappeared into the clouds below. That night, the mechanic from Cleveland couldn't sleep. Kept seeing that German pilot pulling at his reserve chute. The next morning, he was back in his P-38J hunting again, because that was the job. The triangle of death didn't care about philosophy. It only cared about precision. By April 1944, the Luftwaffe was running out of experienced pilots. The ones who'd laughed at the early P-38s were mostly dead or captured. The new pilots, some with less than 50 hours total flight time, were terrified of the twin-boomed American fighters. They'd been told in training that the Lightning was the most dangerous American fighter. Avoid engagement if possible. If engagement was unavoidable, make one pass and dive away. The farm boy from Nebraska encountered a flight of these new pilots over Brunswick. 6 109s flying perfect formation, textbook spacing, too perfect. Experienced pilots would have been looser, more fluid. These were boys following their training to the letter. They saw the P-38s approaching and immediately dove away, abandoning the bombers they were supposed to attack. The farm boy followed one down, more out of duty than enthusiasm. The German pilot flew straight and level in his dive, apparently thinking speed alone would save him. The triangle of death found him at 18,000 feet. The 109 shed its wings like a molting bird. The banker from New York had started keeping a detailed diary of his encounters, not for glory, but for intelligence. He'd noticed patterns in German behavior. The experienced pilots, the ones with kill markings on their tails, fought differently than the novices. They'd learned to respect the P-38J, knew its capabilities and limitations. They'd attack only when they had clear advantages: altitude, numbers, surprise. The new pilots either ran immediately or attacked recklessly and died. April 8, 1944, was the banker's last entry. Over Paderborn, he engaged an experienced German pilot in a 109 G10, the latest model. The fight lasted 6 minutes, an eternity in aerial combat. The German was good, maybe the best the banker had faced. They climbed and dove, rolled and turned, each looking for the fraction of a second advantage that would end it. The banker was winning on points, his twin engines giving him options the German didn't have. Then, his left engine took a cannon shell and caught fire. A P-38 could fly on one engine, but not fight on one, not against an expert. The banker from New York shut down the burning engine, activated the fire suppression, and tried to dive away. The German followed, patient, waiting for the inevitable. The banker's last diary entry, found in his pocket after the war, was brief. Left engine gone, Jerry on my tail, tell Martha I wasn't afraid. He turned into the German for one last head-on pass. The triangle of death spoke one more time. Both planes fired simultaneously. Both pilots died in the air 30 feet apart. The insurance salesman from Philadelphia had survived 61 missions by being careful. He calculated risks like he'd once calculated premiums. But on April 12th, over Schweinfurt, he took a risk that made no actuarial sense. A B-17 named Lucky Lady was going down, 3 engines out, losing altitude fast. 6 German fighters circled it like wolves, taking turns attacking. The bomber's gunners were still fighting, but they were almost out of ammunition. The insurance salesman from Philadelphia was alone, low on fuel, should have headed home. Instead, he dove into the middle of the German fighters. The triangle of death killed 2 109s in the first pass. The others scattered, surprised. He followed one down, destroyed it at low altitude, climbed back up to find the others had re-engaged the dying bomber. He killed one more, damaged another. The last German fighter finally gave up, probably out of ammunition himself. The insurance salesman from Philadelphia stayed with that B-17 all the way to the Channel, used the last of his fuel to make sure they reached the English coast, ran out of gas 2 miles from Dover, had to ditch in the Channel. The water was 38 degrees. He lasted 6 minutes before a British patrol boat pulled him out, lost 3 toes to frostbite, never flew combat again, but Lucky Lady made it home with 8 of her 10 crew alive. May 1944. The invasion everyone knew was coming cast its shadow over everything. The missions were different now, hitting transportation networks, rail yards, bridges. The Luftwaffe came up less often, hoarding its strength. When German fighters did appear, they were either the last of the experts or the greenest of novices. Nothing in between. The teacher from Arkansas shot down his 17th and 18th German fighters over Mannheim. The first was a Focke-Wulf 190 that made the mistake of trying to turn fight with a P-38J. The teacher used differential thrust to create angles that shouldn't exist, got inside the German's turn, and put a 1-second burst into the cockpit. The 190 flew on for a full minute with a dead man at the controls before slowly rolling inverted and beginning its final dive. The second was almost too easy. A novice in a 109, probably on his first combat mission, he flew straight and level, apparently overwhelmed by the chaos around him. The teacher from Arkansas almost didn't shoot. It felt like murder. Then he remembered all the B-17 crews who'd died, 10 men at a time, and pulled the trigger. The triangle of death took the 109's tail off. The German pilot bailed out successfully. Small mercy. The surviving twin from Minnesota had 28 confirmed victories now. He'd stopped counting after 20. They were just numbers. His brother had 12 when he died. Together, they'd have had 40. That meant something maybe, or maybe it meant nothing. He shot down 2 more 109s over Saarbrücken. Quick, clean kills. The German pilots probably never knew what hit them. That was better than knowing. His brother had known for those long seconds as his damaged P-38 spun down. Had time to think about his wife, his son, who'd never remember him. Better not to know. The mechanic from Cleveland was tired. They were all tired. Flying combat missions every other day, sometimes every day. The P-38J was reliable, but the pilots were wearing out. He'd started making mistakes, small ones, but in combat, small mistakes killed you. Over Koblenz, he almost flew into his own wingman while attacking a 109, overcorrected and nearly stalled. Recovered just in time to see the German fighter explode from someone else's guns. He wasn't sure whose. Didn't matter. One less German. One day, closer to done, May 28, 1944. Everyone knew the invasion was soon. The missions were non-stop now. The 8th Air Force was trying to destroy the Luftwaffe before D-Day. The P-38J squadrons were flying 2 missions a day sometimes. Take off at dawn, fight over Germany, land, refuel, rearm, take off again. The ground crews were performing miracles keeping the planes flying. The carpenter from Oregon, the one who'd shepherded the damaged bomber home, would have appreciated the irony of his death. His P-38J, the plane that could fly on one engine, lost both engines to a single golden BB, one small caliber bullet that punctured an oil line that fed both engines. He had 30 seconds to bail out. Made it clean, parachute opened, looked like he'd be a prisoner, but alive. A German farmer with a shotgun killed him as he descended. Against the rules of war, but rules didn't matter much anymore. The accountant from Baltimore had started making plans for after the war. Going to use the GI Bill, go to college, maybe become a real accountant. Instead of a clerk who was good with numbers, he'd survived 71 missions, 5 more, and he'd rotate home. June 1st, he shot down a 109 over Osnabrück, 72. June 3rd, he damaged a 190 but couldn't confirm the kill. Still 72. June 5th, the day before D-Day, he flew his last mission. They were attacking railway junctions near Caen. The Luftwaffe barely showed up. Everyone knew why. They were saving everything for tomorrow, for the invasion. The accountant from Baltimore was relaxed. One more mission after this. He'd survived the worst of it. That's when the single Messerschmitt 109 appeared from nowhere. Probably lost, separated from its unit. The German pilot was either very brave or very stupid. He attacked 12 P-38s alone. The accountant from Baltimore turned into him, expecting the German to break off. Instead, the 109 pilot held his course. They fired simultaneously. The triangle of death tore the 109 apart. But the German had been aiming too. One 20mm shell found the accountant's cockpit. He was dead before his P-38 began its spiral down. 73 missions. One short, D-Day, June 6, 1944. Every Allied aircraft that could fly was over Normandy. The P-38Js flew cover at altitude, keeping German fighters away from the invasion beaches. The Luftwaffe managed to fly only 300 sorties all day. The Allies flew 14,000. The surviving twin from Minnesota shot down 2 109s trying to attack landing craft. Mechanical kills. No emotion. His brother had been dead almost 6 months now. After D-Day, the war changed. The Luftwaffe was dying, not dead, but dying. They'd throw up fierce resistance occasionally, but they couldn't sustain it. The P-38Js kept hunting, but the prey was getting scarce. The teacher from Arkansas went 2 weeks without seeing a German fighter. When he finally encountered one, a lone 190 over Metz, the German pilot bailed out before the teacher could fire, just abandoned his aircraft and jumped. Didn't even try to fight. The mechanic from Cleveland flew his 100th mission on July 20, 1944. The same day, unknown to him, German officers tried to assassinate Hitler. The mission was supposed to be routine, escort B-24s hitting oil refineries. But over the target, 30 German fighters appeared. These weren't novices. These were some of the last experts making what amounted to a last stand. The fight was vicious. The Germans weren't trying to survive anymore. They were trying to take as many Americans with them as possible. The mechanic from Cleveland shot down 2 109s and a 190. His wingman got 3. Together, they saved a damaged B-24 that was trying to make it to Switzerland. The bomber crew would spend the rest of the war interned but alive. The mechanic from Cleveland would die in a car accident in 1946, back home in Ohio. Survived 100 combat missions to die on Route 71 when a drunk driver crossed the center line. August 1944. Paris had been liberated. The German army was retreating across France. The Luftwaffe was down to fuel shortages, throwing up planes only when absolutely necessary. The P-38J squadrons were mostly doing ground attack now, hunting trains and trucks. It was dangerous work. Flak was more deadly than fighters now. The triangle of death was designed for air combat, not strafing. But orders were orders. The farm boy from Nebraska hated ground attack. At least with fighters, it was a fair fight. Machine against machine, skill against skill. Strafing was different. You were killing men who couldn't fight back effectively. Truck drivers, train engineers, regular soldiers trying to retreat. He did it because it was the job, but he did it without the clean conscience that air combat allowed. September 15, 1944. The farm boy from Nebraska flew his last mission. They were attacking a German convoy near Stuttgart. The P-38Js came in low, 50 feet off the deck. The triangle of death tore through soft-skinned vehicles like paper. Trucks exploded. Men scattered. Some shot back with rifles, futile gestures against fighters doing 300 miles per hour. The farm boy made 3 passes. On the 4th, a single rifle bullet found his oil cooler. 1 bullet from some German soldier he'd never see. The engine seized 30 seconds later, too low to bail out. He belly-landed in a field, survived the crash, was captured immediately. Spent 8 months in a POW camp, came home to Nebraska weighing 90 pounds, never flew again. Became a farmer like his father, never talked about the war. The surviving twin from Minnesota ended the war with 39 confirmed kills. Could have had more, but stopped caring about confirmations. He'd shoot down German fighters and not even report them. What was the point? His brother was still dead. In October 1944, he encountered what might have been the last expert German pilot he'd face, a Messerschmitt 109 K4, the final version, flown by someone who knew how to use it. They fought for 8 minutes over the Rhine Valley, climbed to 30,000 feet, dove to 5,000. The German was good, maybe as good as anyone the twin had faced. But the P-38J had advantages that skill couldn't overcome. Twin engines against one, the ability to create impossible angles with differential thrust. The triangle of death waiting for one mistake. The mistake came at 12,000 feet. The German pilot tried to follow the P-38 through a maneuver that required both engines working against each other. The 109 couldn't do it, stalled for half a second. Half a second was enough. The triangle of death found the German's engine. The 109 burst into flames. The pilot bailed out, his flight suit on fire. His parachute opened. The twin watched him descend, still burning, still alive. The German pilot landed in the Rhine and didn't come up. November 1944. The war was clearly ending, but ending slowly. The P-38Js were ranging deep into Germany now, hitting targets that had been unreachable a year ago. Berlin was a regular destination. The flak was still murderous, but German fighters were increasingly rare. When they did appear, they were often jets, Messerschmitt 262s that the P-38s couldn't catch. The triangle of death was useless against an enemy doing 100 miles per hour more than you. The teacher from Arkansas had one encounter with a 262. The jet made a single pass through the bomber formation, destroyed a B-17 and was gone before anyone could react. The teacher tried to pursue, firewalled both engines, got the Lightning up to 420 miles per hour in a shallow dive. The Tu-62 pulled away like the P-38 was standing still. The future of air combat was clear, the triangle of death was already obsolete. But the war wasn't over yet. December 16, 1944. The Germans launched their last offensive in the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge. Weather was terrible, low clouds, snow, fog, the kind of weather that grounded most aircraft. But the P-38Js could fly on instruments better than most fighters. Those twin engines gave them redundancy. Lose an instrument on one engine, you still had backups. The teacher from Arkansas flew 14 missions during the Battle of the Bulge. Mostly ground attack, hitting German columns trying to advance through the forest. The triangle of death was devastating against vehicles bunched up on narrow roads. One pass could destroy a dozen trucks, but the Germans were learning too. They had mobile flak units that would suddenly reveal themselves. The teacher saw two P-38s shot down by quad 20mm guns hidden in hay wagons, January 1, 1945. The Luftwaffe launched Operation Bodenplatte, their last major offensive. Hundreds of German fighters attacked Allied airfields. The surviving twin from Minnesota was taking off when the Germans arrived. Messerschmitt 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s strafing the runway. He had to dodge burning aircraft to get airborne. Once in the air, he shot down 4 German fighters in 12 minutes, the triangle of death working at point-blank range. But the Germans got their hits too. Dozens of Allied aircraft destroyed on the ground. The surviving twin landed on a runway littered with burning wrecks. His crew chief was dead, killed by a strafing 190. The twin helped pull bodies from burning aircraft. Found one pilot he knew, barely alive, legs gone. The pilot asked about his plane. The twin told him it was fine, would be ready tomorrow. The pilot died believing it. February 1945. Everyone knew it was almost over. The Rhine had been crossed. The Russians were closing on Berlin. The Luftwaffe existed mostly on paper now. But young German pilots were still being sent up to die. The teacher from Arkansas encountered one over Nuremberg. A boy, couldn't have been 18, flying a 109 that had probably been patched together from 3 other wrecked planes. The German pilot saw the P-38 and tried to run. Not dive away tactically, just run, like a scared child. The teacher followed, caught him easily. The twin engines against one worn-out Daimler-Benz. He got in position for the kill. The triangle of death would end this in one burst. The teacher held his fire, followed the German for 30 seconds, a minute, finally waggled his wings and turned away, let the boy run. Found out later the German had made it to an airfield, landed, and immediately surrendered to advancing American troops. Smart kid. The war would be over in 2 months. No point dying for a cause that was already lost. March 1945. The surviving twin from Minnesota flew his last combat mission on March 24th. They were escorting bombers deep into Germany. No German fighters appeared, none. The Luftwaffe was effectively finished. The twin flew his patrol pattern, watched for enemies that didn't exist, and thought about his brother. They'd enlisted together in 1941, 4 years ago. Seemed like 40. He landed, shut down the engines of his P-38J for the last time, and walked away. Didn't wait for debrief, didn't say goodbye, just walked to his quarters, packed his bag, and reported to the medical officer with chest pains. They sent him to a hospital in England. Nothing wrong with his heart. Everything wrong with his soul. He never flew again. After the war, he moved to Alaska, as far from everything as he could get. Died in 1987, never married, no children. His obituary mentioned his 39 aerial victories. Didn't mention his brother. April 1945. The war in Europe had days, maybe weeks left. The teacher from Arkansas was reassigned to training duty, teaching new pilots how to fly the P-38J. Most of them would go to the Pacific, where the Lightning's long range was perfect for the vast distances. The teacher tried to teach them about the triangle of death, about differential thrust, about all the tricks that had kept him alive, but they were young and invincible and thought the war would be over before they saw combat. Most of them were right. May 8, 1945, VE Day. The war in Europe was over. The teacher from Arkansas had survived 88 combat missions, shot down 19 German aircraft, never been shot down himself, though his P-38J had been damaged dozens of times. He should have felt victorious. Instead, he felt empty. He'd spent 2 years killing strangers in the sky. Now it was over, and he didn't know what came next. The P-38J Lightning had proven itself. The German pilots who'd laughed at the early models were mostly dead. The forktailed devil had become one of the war's most successful fighters. The triangle of death had claimed hundreds of German aircraft. The twin engines had brought hundreds of pilots home who would have died in single-engine fighters. The teacher from Arkansas went home to Little Rock, became a teacher again. History, not mathematics. Never talked about the war in his classes. When students asked, he'd say he'd been in Europe, leave it at that. One student, years later, looked him up, found his combat record. 19 confirmed kills. The student asked him about it. The teacher said he didn't remember much. Just the cold, he said. All was cold at altitude. He was lying, of course. He remembered everything. Every German fighter exploding, every pilot who didn't get out, every burst from the triangle of death. You don't forget killing 19 men, even in war, even when it's necessary, even when they're trying to kill you. You carry it forever. The teacher from Arkansas carried it until 1998, when he died in his sleep at age 79. His last words to his daughter were about the cold, always cold, at 25,000 feet. The mechanic from Cleveland, who'd survived 100 missions, came home to a hero's welcome. His family threw a party. The local newspaper did a story. He went back to work at the garage, fixing cars instead of P-38s. Married his high school sweetheart. Had 3 kids. Never talked about the war. His wife said he had nightmares. Would wake up grabbing for controls that weren't there. Checking 6 o'clock for German fighters that existed only in memory. He died in that car accident in 1946. His P-38J squadron mates came to the funeral. They talked about how unfair it was, survive 100 missions over Germany to die on a road in Ohio. But maybe it wasn't unfair. Maybe it was just life, random and meaningless as a golden BB finding an oil line. The triangle of death had kept him alive over Germany. Nothing could keep him alive on Route 71. The statistics tell one story. The P-38J shot down more Japanese aircraft than any other fighter. In Europe, it had a positive kill ratio against the Luftwaffe. The concentrated firepower of the triangle of death was devastating. The twin engines provided redundancy and performance. The dive brakes solved the compression problem. By every measure, the P-38J was a successful fighter aircraft. But statistics don't tell about the surviving twin from Minnesota who spent 40 years in Alaska trying to forget. Don't tell about the teacher from Arkansas who remembered the cold until his last breath. Don't tell about the boys who climbed into P-38Js and never climbed out. Don't tell about the German pilots who stopped laughing when the triangle of death found them. The P-38J Lightning was a machine designed to kill other machines. It did that job with remarkable efficiency. The twin 50s and 20mm cannon in the nose created a concentration of firepower that could destroy any aircraft in seconds. The German pilots learned to fear it, learned to respect it, learned too late that the fork-tailed devil was no joke. Years after the war, a Luftwaffe veteran was asked about fighting P-38s. He said the early ones were easy. The later ones, the J models, were death. You could see them coming from miles away, he said, that distinctive twin-boom silhouette. You knew that if they got their nose pointed at you for more than a second, you were finished. The concentration of guns meant no dispersion. Everything hit the same spot, like being hit with a giant sledgehammer. He said German pilots would sometimes argue about which American fighter was most dangerous. Some said the P-51 Mustang because of its range and maneuverability. Some said the P-47 Thunderbolt because it could take incredible damage and keep flying. But anyone who'd faced a P-38J in the hands of an experienced pilot said the Lightning. Because of the triangle of death, because of those twin engines that let it do impossible things, because once it got on your tail, you were already dead. The last combat mission of a P-38J in Europe was flown on May 7, 1945, one day before the war ended. A reconnaissance flight over Czechoslovakia. No German fighters opposed it. The Luftwaffe was finished. The pilot reported seeing white flags in every village. The war was over. The triangle of death had done its work. After the war, most P-38Js were scrapped. Too expensive to maintain in peacetime, too complex for civilian use. Some were converted to racers, some became photoplanes, most became aluminum ingots melted down and reformed into cars and refrigerators and the stuff of peaceful life. The triangle of death transformed into suburban comfort. But the men who flew them remembered. They'd meet at reunions, growing older, fewer each year. They'd talk about the cold at altitude, about the way the engines sounded when synchronized, about friends who didn't come back. They didn't talk much about the killing. That was private, between them and their nightmares. The surviving twin from Minnesota never attended reunions, never joined veteran organizations. When he died in Alaska in 1987, they found a footlocker with his brother's things, letters from home, photos of his brother's wife and son, a list of every German aircraft they'd shot down together with dates and locations. At the bottom, written in pencil, "Should have been me." The teacher from Arkansas attended one reunion in 1975, 30 years after the war. He recognized fewer than half the men there. Time had changed them all. They were grandfathers now, soft around the middle, talking about retirement and grandchildren. But when someone mentioned a specific mission, a specific moment, they all became 25 again, remembering the fear and the cold and the terrible necessity of the triangle of death. The teacher left early, drove home to Little Rock. His wife asked how it was. He said it was fine, said it was good to see the old gang. But that night he sat in his study with a glass of whiskey and his flight log, counted up the missions, the kills, the times he should have died, but didn't, the times other men died instead. He burned the flight log in the fireplace. His wife found him there the next morning, asleep in his chair, the ashes still warm. The P-38J Lightning was retired from U.S. service in 1949. Other countries flew them longer. Honduras used them until 1961. By then they were antiques. Jets had made them obsolete. The triangle of death was no match for missiles and radar. The age of gunfighters was ending. The age of push-button warfare had begun. Today only a handful of P-38s still fly. Restored warbirds at air shows. Crowds watch them pass, that distinctive twin-boom silhouette still recognizable. The announcer talks about specifications, speed, range, firepower, the triangle of death. But the crowds don't understand. Can't understand. They see a beautiful machine. They don't see the ghosts. The ghosts of German pilots who learned too late that the P-38J was no joke. The ghosts of American pilots who climbed into Lightnings and never climbed out. The ghosts of all the young men who met in the sky over Europe and killed each other with remarkable efficiency. The triangle of death claimed them all, one way or another. In 2010, the wreckage of a P-38J was found in a German forest. The pilot's remains were still in the cockpit. Dog tags identified him as the banker from New York, the one who'd traded kills with a German expert over Paderborn. Died at 26, fighting a war that would end 13 months later. His diary was recovered, water-damaged, but readable. The last entry still clear. "Tell Martha I wasn't afraid." Martha had died in 2003, never remarrying. She'd kept his letters, his photos, his medals in a box in her closet. Her children found them after she died. they donated them to a museum. The curator said they get dozens of such donations every year, boxes full of memories from a war that fewer and fewer people remember. The triangle of death reduced to artifacts under glass. The German pilot who'd killed the banker from New York was never identified. His 109 crashed in a field that's now a shopping center. No one knows his name. Whether he had a Martha waiting for him, whether he was afraid. He's just another ghost, another statistical casualty of the air war over Europe. The triangle of death claimed him as surely as it claimed the banker. This is the reality of war, not the clean narrative of good versus evil, not the simple story of American triumph. Just young men in aluminum coffins trying to kill each other before being killed. The P-38J was very good at this. The triangle of death was remarkably efficient. The German pilots who laughed at the early models learned to fear the J, learned too late. The last surviving pilot from the stories above died in 2012. He was 93, living in a nursing home in Florida. Dementia had taken most of his memories, but sometimes he'd grab the wheelchair arms like control sticks, pull back like he was climbing. The nurses thought it was random movement, but his daughter knew. He was 25 again, over Germany, the triangle of death about to speak. In his last lucid moment, he told his daughter about a German pilot he'd shot down. The man had bailed out successfully. They'd made eye contact as the German descended in his parachute, just for a second. But in that second, they'd understood each other completely. Two young men who'd been trying to kill each other. One had won, one had lost. Both had survived. That was enough. The P-38J Lightning was a remarkable aircraft. The triangle of death was a remarkable weapon. Together, they helped win a war that needed winning. But every victory came with a cost. Every German fighter destroyed meant someone's son wasn't coming home. Every American pilot saved meant another would die tomorrow. The ledger of war is written in blood, no matter how remarkable the machine. The German pilots stopped laughing at the P-38J in late 1943. By early 1944, they feared it. By late 1944, most of them were dead. The triangle of death had done its work with terrible efficiency. The fork-tailed devil had earned its name. The lightning had struck again and again until the Luftwaffe was burned to ash. Thanks for joining us on this journey through one of history's incredible survival stories. If you found it compelling, give it a like, and share it with someone who appreciates these tales of courage, and don't forget to subscribe for more.